Agbamuche to come and stand beside me. So there's another Mrs. Agbamuche. She's a commissioner of the independent, yes, of INEC. Yes. And people keep on saying that she's me. Please, we're not the same person. No, we're not. Thank you. So that's why I say that she should come, so that, because people have been saying, and it's true that to that particular Mrs. Agbamuche, we're not seen in the we're not seen in the same place. So people say, you never see them in the same place. That, are you sure it's not the same person? And since I have certain political views or have certain views, there's a tendency to feel, you see, the INEC is biased. They have their political position. I have to tell you that I'm short-sighted in one eye, so I get cross-eyed if I have something right in front of me, especially when I'm trying to look at my paper. But distinguished ladies and gentlemen, when I was invited to take to the platform on June 12th, I took care to ask the organizers what the program was going to be and who would the other speakers be, and if, would there be other speakers? But having now seen that you have two former state governors, a security expert, a former army general, I have to confess that I'm a bit hesitant to spend a lot of time talking about the past and what happened in relation to June 12th or the struggle for democracy in Nigeria. Because while our state governors are fond of designating themselves as executive governor, the media, especially at times like this, prefer the expression chief security officer of the state to describe them. So even though we are here to discuss or to mark Democracy Day, the focus of our discussion is not just democracy, but it's also about governance and national security. And I think that the paper that you heard from Dr. Omole underlined for many people that things don't just happen in a vacuum, that if you plan for X, but you are in the direction of A, then you're going to run into trouble. So if we look at the condition of democracy in the world today, it's actually difficult to argue that it is, especially in our own region, that it's really been out of intensive care. But actually, even the countries that have been practicing democracy for as many as 150 years, not a very long period in the history of humankind, but even those countries are now giving democracy a bad name. And here in Nigeria, against the background of genuine resentment of the treatment by France of its former colonies in the Sahel, as well as a very skillful propaganda campaign by this is being run out of mostly Burkina Faso and the military dictator there, and the deepening discontent that we have, which is actually, not to say real anger, of Nigerians at the economic hardship that has been produced by the Tinubu administration's economic reforms, especially floating the naira and ending fuel subsidy. That anger and discontent has been given added fuel by the sense that insecurity is rising. And with that comes the demands to know, how is democracy helping us? How is it solving our problems? Now, of course, when we make that demand, the inconvenient facts about insecurity in the Sahelian military dictatorships are glossed over, and the completely different relationship that Nigeria has with its former colonizer, let alone France, those are ignored, while some declare that they are fed up with this democracy. And they believe that by some means, which I have to say are not really apparent to me, that if we remove even the pretense of choice about who governs us in favor of allowing a self-appointed group to pick who will rule us without any reference to us at all, we just hope that the military dictator who emerges will be the one that we like. that is the method that will lead us into the sunlit uplands of security and prosperity. One might even say, in the words of our national anthem, peace and plenty, that Nigeria is going to be blessed with. Now, I think that would hardly be true even if democracy was only a once every 4 years event when citizens get to choose who will govern them. But of course, democracy is a lot more than that. The fact that citizens will get that choice must necessarily dictate the way that those who win the contest should behave in the intervening period. That is, provided that we, the citizens, don't sleep on our rights, or allow ourselves to accept the idea that those rights can be trampled upon because what's important is that the team that we support should win, continue to win. Or even more important, that those whom we have not chosen should definitely not win and should never smell victory. Now, it's true, I said the sense that insecurity is rising. I said that not because the insecurity that we're now all talking about is in our imaginations, but because we, or some of us in this country, in Nigeria, have been living with that insecurity for well over a decade. That's why we still have camps for internally displaced people. And some of our citizens are still living in refugee camps in other countries, including those Sahelian dictatorships. Indeed, when 276 Chibok girls were kidnapped on the night of the 14th to 15th of April 2014, it was because that abduction had followed on a series of atrocities against schools in the northern part of the country principally, without any apparent action beyond sympathy and concern from the federal government of Nigeria, that the people of Nigeria rose up and said, Haba, is that what you're going to do? No. And when 2 weeks actually passed with no action except a deeply distasteful display of passing the buck, you, the governor, it's your fault. You, principal, you did not do this. Why should you hold exams? Why should children have in education when the security situation is what you all know about? When all that was seen, that was when the Bring Back Our Girls movement was born. Now, a decision recently was taken to hand the campaign for the return of the Chibok girls over to not only those who had escaped during the course of the kidnapping and had been rescued by the Buhari administration after, but we decided to hand it over to them. But the campaign used to meet firstly, we used to meet weekly in Lagos. Firstly, we used to meet at the Outer Marina, and then we used to meet at the Falomo roundabout, which is why, if you go there, you'll see the murals by Polly Alakija, which have the pictures of the Chibok girls and also the pictures of the Sambisa forest, where they were alleged to have been taken. When one of our participants who used to come from mainland called me last week to say, look, what are we going to do, that this thing is getting worse? Well, as I said, we'd handed over the campaign, but I felt compelled to just go up to Falomo, as I used to do, to walk up to Falomo, to stand in the gap for our missing children. I mean, Dr. Mole spoke about the Emirates Stadium, but when I was a schoolgirl at Highbury Hill High School, and the old stadium was just down the road from where, it's at the bottom of the hill from where the school that I attended was. And we used to have, on a regular basis, we used to have what we called fire drills. In other words, everybody in the school knew what they would have to do in the event that there was a fire. And we also had a place where we were supposed to gather so that we could count and see if anybody missing. And it got to the stage where in Nigeria, we said that we're going to be just like those children in America. Because in the United States, children have a drill for what to do if a lunatic comes in and decides that their job for the day is to shoot a lot of school children. They have their protocols, they have their system about what they will do. I used to ask, well, Have we got anything like that in Nigeria? Because when we talk about safe schools and safe schools initiative, we have to understand that no matter how pervasive the police are going to be, the people on the spot are the children and their teachers, and they have to know what to do. Well, I'm not going to do security because, as I said, we've got enough security agencies here. And quite frankly, one of the other things that I did after I ceased being the president of the Civil Liberties Organization was to chair a panel on civil reform that the civil society had set up, because there had been one of these atrocities. It's not the Akpo 6, but another atrocity in which the police had been found wanting. And President Goodluck Jonathan at the time said he's going to set up a panel to reform the police so that this sort of thing will never happen again, etc., blah, blah, jabber, jabber. And so civil society said, you know what? Whenever they set up these panels, we prepare a memorandum and we go and we submit it to the panel that the government has set up. They receive our memorandum, and just as Dr. Omole said, they receive it, glance at it, and then they shelf it. So we said, okay, we'll give them something a bit more substantial to shelf. We're going to set up our own panel, and we're going to hold our own hearings. We're going to take evidence from people, and we're going to present a report. And we did. And of the recommendations, well, one of our recommendations was actually for state police. We also recommended that the Inspector General of Police should be an open process. But of course, whenever it comes to choosing the political power that goes with control over the police is just too sweet for political leaders to let go. So let's see what happens. Now, as I said, with abductions that's affecting us here, right here in Yoruba land, it's tempting for some of us to argue that it's in fact democracy that's the problem, that the politicians are busy running after elections, that they're not concerned with our security. But I need to make my position on this very clear. There is absolutely no conflict between national security and democracy. In fact, in my view, if our security is to be sustained, then we have to have democratic legitimacy. However, that democracy itself can only survive if the response to mass criminal violence is grounded in the rule of law. You know, I say prayers every morning, and amongst the things that I pray for are our security agencies. I pray for them protection, blessing, but I also pray that they should follow human rights and humanitarian law in carrying out their operations. Now, there may be others who think that if they call themselves moral or democratic, or even most moral, or even only democracy, then their barbarity and savagery may be excused. But what we have seen is that even genocide is not enough to suppress. And in any case, it's not an option for us here in Nigeria. We can't do scorched earth with our own country, with our own fellow citizens. So let me repeat, for those who think that we're in this situation because we've been treating the perpetrators of the joint evils of terrorism, insurgency, banditry, and kidnapping, with the side helping of violent communal strife with kid gloves, human rights and security are not enemies. On the contrary, they are partners. They're necessary partners, because a government that respects human rights is a government that earns cooperation. And on the contrary, a government that disregards them, it breeds resistance. As I said, even genocide is not going to erase that resistance. So the trust and support of the people in their security agencies, and therefore the effectiveness of those agencies, is bolstered when they act lawfully. A state is strongest not when it inspires fear, but when it commands trust, when it earns trust. So, democracy and security. Yes, of course, there are those who are going to be quick to point out that our current president, Bola Tinubu, was one of those who berated the Goodluck Jonathan administration for its failings on the issue of security, and in particular, for its failure to bring back our girls. The problem with that is that despite migrating from one political party to another, or back or sideways or forwards again, many of those who point this out are actually associated with the political party that failed Nigeria in the 2010s. In fact, today, some of the people who want to berate the current administration for its present-day failure were loud in their insistence that the whole abduction of the Chibok girls was a hoax, it was fake, that no Chibok girls had been abducted, that the whole thing was a ruse to bolster the All Progressives Congress and delegitimize the then ruling People's Democratic Party. Well, let me say that apart from the sheer ridiculousness and callousness of that discourse, the governor knows something about it, or the president is trying to undermine the governor, etc., etc. You've all heard it. Who does that help? Does it help the people who have been kidnapped? Let me agree, yes, the issue of security was, is, and will remain a political issue. And the solutions offered must necessarily come from those who want to govern us, and who must therefore present their plans for securing us when they're seeking our votes. But my response to the work of political opponents nonsense is in two parts. First, until we reach agreement and act accordingly on the principle that the crime or alleged crime must be investigated, the alleged perpetrators must be brought to book by law enforcement agencies, no matter the identity of the alleged victim. Is the victim Muslim, Christian, Fulani, Berom, Tiv? Are they an adherent of Party X or Party Y? And so on and so on and so forth ad infinitum. And no matter the identity of the alleged perpetrator, ditto. Do they come from here? Do they come from there? Are they an adherent of this person or that person? If we don't understand that we must investigate the crime and bring the perpetrator to book, regardless of identity, we will continue to be plagued by these evils. That's why the whole suspected Fulani herdsmen narrative is so unhelpful. It's ridiculous. Because the implication is that if the perpetrator belongs to this group rather than that, then law enforcement is allowed to fold its hands and declare helplessness. Or only if the alleged perpetrator doesn't belong to this group, perceived as being under political protection, then law enforcement can act. Or if the victim belongs to this group, ditto. I can't help remembering Deputy Inspector General of Police Haruna John. He died in a helicopter crash in 2012, but I remember he gave an interview in which he was saying that as often as his team arrested alleged kidnappers, perpetrators of crime, locked them up, before he could turn around, he would find that those people had been released. A top politician or an oga at the top had made a call that those people should be released because they were his boys. But I digress. You see, we're focusing on identity rather than the criminal act and its investigation has got us. Second, my second point is that, okay, what if the abductions are indeed aimed at undermining the president or his political party, or the governor and his? Is the administration therefore free to say, well, in that case, we don't have to rescue the victims? I don't think so. Of course not. So for those pushing that narrative, my response is the same as it was when it was alleged that the abduction of the Chibok girls was a plot by late Muhammadu Buhari to undermine the Jonathan administration so that he could win political power. And that is that, on the contrary, knowing the political stakes involved, it behoves the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and the man who, as at now, despite the recommendations of our civil society panel on police reform, the man who still has the power to direct the policy of the Nigeria police force, as well as numerous other security bodies, plethora of initials, SSS, DMI, NSS, NSA, NSDC, and so on and so forth. It behoves that man to ensure that this evil plague is brought to a swift end so that it cannot be used as a political weapon in the hands of his opponents. Because for the victims, it's really not relevant whether the kidnappings are the work of political enemies or whether they're the work of ordinary criminals who just want to get rich or to free their colleagues, as the current ones are alleged to be saying, or whatever it is that they want to do. In fact, one of the most thought-provoking quotes from President Tinubu that I remember is this: "I plan for betrayal. I plan for backstabbing. I also plan for reunion and forgiveness long before they happen. In life, I expect nothing. I expect anything. I expect everything." So my view is that we're entitled to expect President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to anticipate everything and to neutralize this threat. Thank you.
Let's